Hello, welcome to IT Expert YouTube video series. Today we are going to talk about definition of done. What is the definition of done, DOD, in Agile? The definition of done creates transparency by providing everyone a shared understanding of what work was completed as part of the increment. If a product backlog item does not meet the definition of done, it cannot be released or even presented at the sprint review. Instead, it returns to the product backlog for future consideration. What is the definition of done in SAFe or other scaling frameworks? The Scaled Agile Framework or short SAFe does not have a specific description of a definition of done other than they acknowledge and promote its existence. SAFe ultimately consists of a larger number of Scrum Agile teams, thus it also promotes the basic principles of Scrum. For every scaled approach to product development, multiple teams working together on the same product, it is recommended that these teams run in a synchronized manner and share the essential pieces of the definition of done. Any team can add more items to their definition of done, but no team should deliver items that other teams do not consider as done. Who defines done? Definition done is defined by Scrum Team Product Owner, Scrum Master, Dev Team. All Scrum teams must agree on one definition of done. This provides transparency and clarity among Scrum teams. On a regular interval, teams can review and modify the DOD to improve overall product quality and software practices. 3 benefits of using the definition of done approach. 1. It helps the team make steady and predictable progress. When they have a clear, concrete list of criteria they must meet to consider their work finished, an Agile team can more effectively plan their workload. They can estimate completion timeframes. The definition can help them focus on what matters. Thus, they are also less likely to veer off track or find themselves missing deadlines in sprints. 2. It increases the accuracy of estimates for the cross-functional team. The definition of done makes clear what the Agile team needs to do to consider a project complete. It helps the team offer more transparency to the rest of the organization. That is, because the team has a shared understanding of what done and releasable will look like. They are better positioned to give accurate estimates to external stakeholders about when to expect projects to be completed. 3. It helps the team work together more effectively. When they get together to discuss upcoming work during sprint planning, for example, a Scrum team with an agreed-upon definition of done already has a shared understanding of what each item in the sprint will require. This will make it much easier for the team to assign tasks, work cohesively, and ultimately develop higher quality products consistently. Why is a definition of done important? Which purposes does it serve? The moment one starts working in a team, it is important to create a shared understanding around multiple things. Any team should be aligned on the vision mission of that team. Any team should have co-created working agreements in place. And as part of the working agreements, any team should be aligned on what done means to them. This shared understanding of done enables different people working on different items but still delivering consistent quality and user experience. It also results in simplifying the onboarding process of new team members. Further, it makes cross-team collaboration in a scaled environment much easier. And finally, it ensures that the work of every team and its members complies with the requirements of the organization. When is the definition of done created? It is recommended that teams create their definitions of done as early as possible and at the latest prior to the first sprint planning. Without a shared understanding of what done means, it is basically impossible to align on how much work a team can pull into a sprint. If a team is not willing to create a definition of done prior to the first sprint planning, they will realize during the sprint, or at the latest in the sprint review, that the quality they have been shipping is not consistent and most likely does not meet stakeholder expectations. Who creates the definition of done in Scrum? Multiple parties are involved in the creation of the definition of done. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the Scrum team to create this shared understanding. They should consider input from various stakeholders in order to meet their expectations. What is typically included in the definition done? A typical definition of done includes answers to the following questions. How do we ensure that we meet the business requirements? How do we ensure that we have a consistent quality? As an example, a definition of done could be this. All acceptance criteria are met. All necessary tests have been successfully completed. We have had multiple check the work. All necessary documentation has been created. The product owner has reviewed the work and is happy. Depending on the domain of work, teams can have longer, more detailed, and sometimes shorter high-level definitions of done. In most cases, a definition of done evolves over the course of a project and becomes more granular. What is the difference between the definition of done and the definition of ready? The definition of done refers to an item being fully developed, finished. Contrary to that, the definition of ready describes the requirement of an item being good enough so that a team can start working on it. Also, the definition of done is mentioned in the Scrum framework, whereas the definition of ready is not. This is an artifact teams can add. There are as usual pros and cons of doing that. What is the definition of ready in Scrum? The definition of ready captures the shared understanding of the steps a team needs to take to ensure a requirement is well defined and the team can pull it into their next sprint. Many teams use the INVEST acronym as their definition of ready. I for independent is the item independent or have considered dependencies in our prioritization process. N for negotiable, have we talked about the item. V for valuable, do have sense of the value we are creating for our users. E for estimable, can we estimate the effort that goes into delivering this item. S for sized appropriately, does it fit into our sprint or do we see options of making it smaller. T for testable, do we know what is expected from us. Have we documented the acceptance criteria? This is one of many ways to create a definition of ready. The most important aspects are that no item is being started to work on without the team having discussed it. Why is the definition of ready important? Similar to the definition of done, the definition of ready helps a team to work better together. It is important for a product owner to know what the team expects when they create a requirement. It is important for the team to know in which part of the process they can support the product owner to deliver better requirements. How to create a definition of done for your feature, project, or task in 5 steps. People often have different ideas of what needs to be done, and getting your entire team on the same page isn't always easy. But even more difficult than deciding on a definition of done is keeping people accountable to the contract. 1. Decide on your definition of done as a team. Who defines done for your user story feature project? While defining done should include input from the product team, quality control, and relevant stakeholders, it's ultimately up to the technical team to decide what it means. Excel at project management and be loved by your teammates. However, this has to be a collaborative process. Without input from other teams, you won't get the support you need to ship a feature. You will also be stuck dealing with stakeholders who have different expectations or are confused as to why a feature has not shipped. To help this along, it's essential that your definition of done is available to everyone and that there is transparency around why those are the requirements you chose. This way, everyone knows why a release or feature is held up and what needs to be done to move it forward. Different companies and development teams will decide on what done means to them. However, in most cases, done comes back to the same golden rule: the code does what it's supposed to and doesn't break anything else in the process. That's a bit vague. So let's look at some basic examples of definition of done criteria to help clarify what this looks like in practice. Code is written. The most basic thing that needs to be completed for any user story or issue to be done is that it's built. Code is documented. At this level, you most likely want to have some developer documentation finished and made accessible. Depending on the size of the project, you might also want to create some form of help documentation for the handoff to support. Code review has been completed. As part of your sprint, you will want to get your code ready for review with clear metrics set. To be done, the code needs to be checked by your team for any issues or bugs. Build has been made and deployed on a testing environment. Your definition of done needs to expand beyond just the scope of writing code. By including a deploy in it, you will help keep your sprints on track and also keep the end goal in mind for developers. Tests have been passed. Does it work? Before you can be done, you need to make sure you have gone through your test plan and make sure you didn't break anything else in the meantime. 2. Create a checklist template for your definition of done. With a clear definition of done in place, you need to ensure that these rules apply to every applicable task or issue in your sprint. Whether it's a huge feature release or a bug fix, it needs to go through your doneness checklist. This is where many teams fail. In the pressure to get through a sprint, it's easy to ignore the larger definition of done and focus only on the acceptance criteria for each issue or feature. And while this might give you a bunch of functional pieces, they won't come together into a finished whole. Most of this comes down to awareness. How can you make sure your team always has the definition of done front and center while they are working? The answer is simple. Embed it into their workflow. And what better place for this than in your project management tool? Here's a great example. With Planeo checklists, you can create a template for your definition of done items as well as acceptance criteria to be used on each user story. To do this, head to your Planeo account, and in the Administration section select Settings Checklist Templates and create a new global checklist template. This can also be done for specific projects within the settings for that project. Choose a name that makes sense for the checklist and then choose whether you want it visible to only you or all users. You can then choose the tracker you want it associated with and then add all the items that should be included. Lastly, you can set this checklist to default on each issue. This way, whenever your team is working on an issue, they are reminded of what they are working towards. With a checklist like this, your DOD items are always front and center and your team doesn't get sucked into tunnel vision. 3. Don't obsess over the list of criteria. As your team decides on their definition of done, it can be easy to get carried away with thinking through what an ideal version looks like. And while this is a good exercise, you have to be realistic with what you include in your criteria. Earlier, we called the definition of done a shared understanding between the development team and the product owner. But too many DoD items will split your team's attention. They will have too many different factors on their mind, which will lead to one of two outcomes. They will only work on a small subset of DoD items. They will try to do everything and most likely fail. A good rule of thumb is to think of your definition of done as the minimum work required to meet your agreed upon quality level. What right means might change over time. Which means that you should be managing your definition of done over time and reviewing it to see if you can remove criteria. In the end, done is always better than perfect. 4. Make sure each individual task has its own specific acceptance criteria. We talked before about the difference between acceptance criteria and your definition of done and how both are needed in order to successfully finish your sprint or call a user story complete. As you work through your sprint planning process, make sure each issue includes relevant information and acceptance criteria. Again, this is a great place to use checklists. Not only does this make sure your team knows what they need to be working on, but it makes it that much easier to clearly tick off the acceptance criteria met portion of your definition of done. 5. Check your DoD against organizational needs. In pretty much all cases, the definition of done should be set by the entire Scrum team. In Agile, your team is solely responsible for turning your product backlog into sprints and usable software. However, the problem is when you get too focused on the task at hand and forget about the larger goals, needs, and conventions of your company. A definition of done will occasionally need to be checked against your core values and principles to make sure no glaring issues are being missed. Here's an example that Agile coach Willem Jan Ageling uses of a product team tasked with building a new app for a financial institution. While the app itself was a success based on the development team's definition of done and user feedback, it shipped with a security breach that showed sensitive user information. Not good. But just how could an app get shipped without checking these compliance issues? Even though the company Access wanted to believe everyone shared and understood the company's values, that's not always reflected in a definition of done. The technical team's focus is on building usable software, not worrying about compliance issues. In the end, a definition of done is all about trust. There's one final reason you should care about a definition of done: it builds trust across your team and your entire organization. A shared, open, and honest vision of what quality software looks like puts everyone on the same page and avoids the headache of hearing. Collaborate as a group to define what done looks like, use checklists and project management tools like Planeo to keep it front and center, and your team will be well on the path to continuously building higher quality software. Thank you for watching this video. We provide hands-on training with labs, homework, group projects. Prepare you for the certification. Provide real projects. Internship opportunities. Support you in Resume, LinkedIn. Staffing support. Provide tech references. In-person, online class. Class retake options and more. Call us at 847-350-9034 for your free career consultation meeting. Please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for the latest videos.